ね。
そうです。本当
途中ですよね。
どうしよう。Only five. I think.
There. Hi. Matthias, can you hear me?
Hi, Susan.
Hi there.
So sorry.
Um,
So I think there was a problem with the Zoom. It all of a sudden got cut off. We are sorry for that.
Swati, send email to everyone to connect again.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Sorry about that. Sorry, Susan.
I haven't said it.
But I know if I'm panic, keep calling everyone. There's not gonna be connecting, so I send message. Sorry. Wait, maybe 2 minutes to make everyone coming.
Yes.
Sorry,
okay. So it wasn't just me dropping out; it was the whole meeting stopping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is my first experience, but I know my college had that experience before. I don't know what happened. Yeah, actually, hopefully, but I put the name of the people that already leave a message of a question. So if I couldn't retrieve the message, I just
yes, we lost the questions too.
Yeah, okay. And then it's quite like 4 people already leave a message. So, and that's very long one. So
you want me to start sharing the screen just to check it out while we
yes.
Let me try this.
I think I finished my introduction to you right before, so do you think that I need to repeat my introduction for you?
I think I can just, if you hang on, can you see this just to check?
Yes. Yeah, yes, I can see. And then it's better you make it like a slideshow, so that's
yeah.
Let me see. I think it's better. I think it's fine with some key people already here. So I think, Susan, I think now the floor is yours, so you can start.
Yes, okay. I'm just checking whether you still, or do you want to record this again? Because I think you recorded the other one. And I think we are recording, are we? Okay, all right. Right, welcome back everyone to the second part of this meeting. And the last presentation, and we're really now going down into sort of the country level from the big picture, and I will share what's happening in New Zealand, and hopefully it's useful for other countries as well to see some, I guess, response in practice. But maybe just for the context, because not so long ago, New Zealand has been suffering from quite considerable over-tourism, just like many other countries that now experience the opposite. And so we have had already work set up for sort of dealing with this. In fact, we had a government audit report essentially into tourism, and that had concluded literally in December 2019, so 3 months before the whole thing stopped. That tourism is suffering from unmanaged growth, high visitor density, very high carbon footprint. The New Zealand government, for its statistics division, is now measuring the carbon emissions of tourism, and of course it emerged it's a very high contributor because of the long haul flights and also cruise ships, degradation of landscapes, and also some of the governance where central government might make decisions that are not necessarily wanted like that by the local community or the Maori, the indigenous people. So this is where we were three months before the pandemic. What you can see now, and it just echoes the graphs we've seen, is obviously the reduction of international travel. What's really interesting, and I could not find a graph, because often what happens in countries that we measure very exactly everything to do with international tourism, but we almost measure nothing to do with domestic travel. In fact, in New Zealand, we stopped our domestic statistics in 2012 because we considered it not important. And we're also not really measuring outbound travel. So we do know, though, that the 4 million people that come to New Zealand are balanced by 3 million New Zealanders going overseas. And so those 3 million are now, like myself, all in New Zealand stuck and can't go anywhere. So and that's a good thing. It's a savior for the tourism industry. But let me just show you something first. So this is our official government COVID communication, and what you can see here is the number of cases that we've had really around April, May. And then the blue ones are the imported cases. So these are a lot of New Zealanders coming back into the country. We had a little outbreak in Auckland in September, and now we're back to eliminate, so the strategy is elimination. And that's really important because we talked a lot about sort of safety perceptions and how we can facilitate travel with hygiene. So what happened in New Zealand is that we can travel domestically without mask, without worrying at all. But it did come at the expense of closing our borders. And so far this has been politically supported very well, which was evident in the election where the government got a landslide victory just a few weeks ago. So in the moment, effectively, we've become a domestic economy as far as tourism is concerned. Other export sectors are going very well indeed, agriculture and so on, but for tourism, it's domestic. What I show here is that based on electronic card spending, expenditure on things like consumables, but also hospitality, you can see has increased compared with the previous year. So 2.9% in total. Of course, some sectors have suffered, like fuel, for example, because we had a lot of international tourists who drive around the country and consume fuel. But overall, domestic tourism has more than compensated the loss of international travel. And that's really interesting. And it gives us a little bit of a breather to rethink what the country wants to go forward. So I'm coming to that now. The government has established a so-called Tourism Futures Task Force, which is independent, but it is a partnership between very high caliber industry leaders and government. And it will come up with a whole new plan for tourism in the future. The task is to link in with, so New Zealand has a well-being framework and a well-being budget. It's explicitly not seeking to maximize economic outcomes, but looking at contributing to all four capitals. So that's natural, social, human, and economic. And so the idea of this task force is to rebalance what has become quite a sort of almost like a runaway tourism sector without much management and without necessarily the optimum return on the country. Now, tourism in this task force, and really widely supported by the tourism sector, is seen to be part of a living system. And this view is very strongly influenced by the indigenous paradigm, the indigenous framework of humans being a part of nature. And if nature doesn't do well, and words that are used here are the health of the ecosystem, it needs to thrive, then there will be no space for humans either. So that might sound esoteric, but it is truly embedded in the thinking now, where the European culture, if you want, and the Maori worldview, the close to the Pacific Islands as well, is really merging into something that puts nature much more at the center and not people necessarily. The catchphrase in New Zealand is all about reimagining. And yes, we want to open the borders again, by the way. We do want to welcome international tourists, and people also want to travel overseas, but there is a true reconnecting with your own country going on, and trying to reimagine what is the role of tourism in the wider economy. How can it work together better with other sectors, agriculture, for example? What are the governance arrangements, including in particular the balance between national level and local community level? What's the marketing, the role of marketing? How can we reimagine that? What's the business practices we want to foster? How do we interact with nature and so on? And what does travel even mean? So there's a lot going on. One thing, so I won't go through all this in detail, but some people might recognize this as sort of the leverage point concept for meadows, where you have different points in the system where you can intervene. The bottom one is really the whole paradigm. What do we even, what's our goal? And this is where the living system comes in. How do we balance the different well-being outcomes, etc. Whereas at the top level, they are the little little levers, like, for example, the tourism industry has some kind of sustainability commitment for businesses, but like a standard where you can measure carbon and you measure water and so on. It's a very sort of low level lever, and then it goes further up where, for example, we do have an international visitor levy that raises funds for conservation projects. Obviously in the moment that has gone to almost zero, but long term it will come back. So there's different points to intervene. And I just give a few sort of concrete examples before I close with some sort of key questions going forward. But one is, for example, in the Bay of Plenty. This is in the North Island. This has started before COVID, but it really resonates now with the transformation idea that the whole country is getting behind. So this destination has done a DNA analysis, like who are we, what do we want, with very strong input from the local Maori, from the tribe, from community, and it's all centered around essentially place building. So this is not for people just to come and consume and extract, but it's for people in the first instance to live, to enjoy and find their own identity, and then to welcome others to enjoy it as well. Regeneration is a core principle, and that's going right through the discussions in the moment. Regenerative tourism, tourism giving back to nature, restoring nature, whether that's through carbon offsetting or other projects, and then really developing visitor experiences that are quite different, high value, and not so dependent on the volume. Now that's easily said, but that's the direction it's taking. Another good example is down from the South Island, Queenstown area, very famous tourist area where the community is getting together. So we see a lot of grassroots initiatives, and they have come up with a system where visitors can essentially contribute to the local community and environment financially, and then you can get discounts and so on when you become a member. But again, it's this idea of a community trying to create the type of tourism they want to see. Finally, we've got a lot of tourism conservation partnerships going on. In fact, a very significant part of the stimulus money that the government invested right at the start of the COVID crisis, 1.2 billion New Zealand dollars went into conservation, green jobs. So we talked about green jobs earlier. So this is really in particular also those businesses, tourism businesses where there's unemployment in the moment because they had focused on international markets. They contribute to, say, 3-year nature restoration projects. Now, the key questions that I guess are floating around, and also in my mind thinking about other destinations, is, will there be a shift towards closer travel? And Matthias showed some interesting graphs around domestic travel. We don't have the time here, but I can see that there's major changes in global aviation, in the industry. I can see major restructuring, and people's appetite to travel long haul might be different in the future from what it was before the crisis. I don't think it will be in the end of tourism. There will be a lot of tourism, but it might be closer. And what does that mean for some countries? Which countries do need support? We talked about small island developing states. Should there be a transition? And I do know a colleague who did work in the Pacific Islands, including in Fiji, where in particular focusing on indigenous people, there is a sense of building greater resilience in response to COVID because of reducing the dependency on tourism. So I could see a little bit like New Zealand reflecting, Vanuatu would be another one, reflecting on what would be a good level of tourism in the future and where should markets come from. One thing that we're really talking about here is decoupling the mobility from the carbon footprint. And so this obviously has to do with aviation fuels, not offsetting. Offsetting is a short-term solution. So I hope and expect to see some leadership coming out of New Zealand in terms of really investing into sustainable aviation fuels and having a long-term transition to zero carbon aviation, because otherwise we will have a similar problem again in 10 years or 15 years, because climate change is not going away. And if we want to rebuild international tourism, this has to be a priority. Finally, and in some ways related to some of those issues, so tourism has become much more volume driven with ever decreasing margins, with some exceptions, but generally it's been a volume and not a value proposition. And so what are the fundamental levers to shift that back towards travel that is maybe more meaningful, more purposeful, more rewarding for the traveler and the destination, and also the businesses involved? And that raises questions just like thinking about that pyramid of the levers. What is the ultimate goal of tourism, and how can it contribute, for example, to the Sustainable Development Goals? So with that, I conclude. I have one last slide about the change process, because change is hard. Change often leads to much better outcomes, and there's sort of a little bit of friction on the way. Not everything will survive. In one question we're asking ourselves in New Zealand, what's the current system look like? What do we want to carry forward, and which bits do we need to leave behind? Which bits of tourism should we sort of take the opportunity to basically cut off? And so that's the whole idea of going through this process, and hopefully coming out of the crisis better than we were before. So with that, I conclude, and looking forward to a discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Susan. And then I'm sorry, I mean, I apologize. I already find what happened, but actually that's part of my fault too. I have two projects in the same time, and my associates kind of confused which one that he need to use. So I'm sorry. So we have many questions before. That we have Professor Koid, Asim Saha, I think, and I will give the floor to Professor, how I pronounce your name?
Che.
Yes. Yeah.
Che.
Choi. Okay. Yes. So I give you the floor.
Okay. Thank you so much. It has been really interesting to listen to you all speakers. I have just a quick question. With all this posts, there has been actually huge booming creativity in the sector, like as they mentioned. And I have been talking to many local artists and small business owners in rural Bali. And they have very marketable, interesting products and virtual experiences like yoga classes, coffee making classes, and cooking classes. And I think they're marketable. And there's a demand out there that can, create profit. But they have a serious lack of skills with online, and they don't have platform to sell their products. And we've been kind of discussing who has to support you and how can they be helped. And they seem to be very small kind of entities, but they are very important in this time, I think, in building resilience in these communities, cities, and countries. And they are driving economic livelihoods. So that's my question. Who's responsible for supporting them?
Thank you, Professor Ko. I think Kim and Susan, I think you can answer the question. Or do you have a specific speaker that you want to ask, Professor Ko?
No, to anybody.
Okay, yes. Okay, all speakers is if you want to respond is fine. I give you the floor, maybe Kim. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for the question. I think this goes directly to the spillovers and linkages with local communities and local industries and retail sectors that I was mentioning, fundamental in terms of a holistic approach to revive the tourism sector and build sustainable tourism. Because you can't really have a healthy tourism sector if it's leaving half of the population behind. And I know in the country I come from, South Africa, that is also very important. How do you integrate local crafters, local cultural and creative into the tourism value chain? And it's not an easy question, but in terms of support, I know that, and probably Dale or other people would be more qualified to speak to this, but within the WTO, there's the EIF framework, in the Aid for Trade framework. They assist with building supply capacity on the ground, facilitating integration of different sectors into tourism value chain, and really building the export competitiveness of the sector as a whole. using different players to feed into the tourism value chain. I know also ITC, International Trade Center in Geneva, does a lot of work with building export strategies for smaller developing countries and developing countries in general, but they focus more on the ground at the firm level, at the implementation project level. So I think this is definitely the direction that I think international organizations, donors need to think if they're really serious about sustainable tourism. How do you integrate the communities, the informal sector, allow people to showcase their products and services, and build linkages with larger suppliers, tourism value chain, hotel chain, tourism guiding services, etc. Showcase the smaller players and the local communities, products and services, and attractions. But off the top of my head, I would, in terms of the support available, I would look at the ITC and WTO's Aid for Trade initiative. And as I say, Dell and Carsten could probably speak more authoritatively than myself on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Susan, you want to give an additional response? Or Matthias, you want?
Yeah, I feel a bit compelled because it's about finance, and ADB should, of course, also play a role. So just to let you know that, of course, ADB tried to help our member countries in terms of response to this pandemic. And in April, we launched a big support package called the COVID-19 Pandemic Response Option, CIPRO, where we basically offered countries to take up to 1.5 billion in terms of emergency loan. And we hope that some of these funds and money trickle down to people in need. However, it's not an easy undertaking, but I know that governments have been very proactive in helping local communities, also in terms of joining online platforms. So as you know, this pandemic has accelerated the move towards online platforms. And for example, for the case of Indonesia, and Nella knows that much better than I do, we have a very strong online platform already where people can sell their goods and services. I think one issue is, of course, that this all came in a very rapid way, and now it will take time to help these communities to receive aid, and so it's not going to be easy the coming months and years. Back over to you, Nella.
Thank you. Susan, I think you're ready to speak.
Yes, so maybe, so I'm not an expert at all in sort of short-term recovery and support. So I'm thinking generally more around the long-term planning for sustainable and resilient tourism. And I would think that it's really important for destinations around the world and the small businesses in them to think a little bit more diversified. That's whether that's in an island state or even in New Zealand, we have businesses that have completely depended on one particular, for example, Chinese market. All the business is gone. They have to reinvent themselves very quickly. And so whether that's across different products, but also working with other sectors and industries. So we've got farm stays, for example, that have already diverse portfolios where you have a mix of agricultural product and maybe a tourism product. And I think what Matthias says, online having maybe something that can be traded even if the people themselves can't come. So it's really thinking about, and Samoa comes to my mind, where I think Samoa has been very smart. They never got quite, and Kim, you might have some views on that as well, but they have never completely got into the absolute mass tourism trap. And they have always, well, because they had been exposed to so many also natural disasters. So the whole, even the concept of beach falas that they put up, and even if there's a cyclone, the capital damage isn't that big. The whole body shop partnership with the coconut oil, the whole coffee trading. So the women groups that do all sorts of things. And so it's a very long-winded answer, but I guess the bottom line is, if you expect that people keep coming long haul flying, unless we solve the other problem around the carbon footprint, but even then there could be future pandemics. So I just wouldn't rely 100% on people traveling long distances forever. So that would be my plan.
Okay, thank you. Dale, you want to speak? Please.
Right. This gives me a chance to talk about aid for trade, which Karsten had raised during his intervention, the keynote in the beginning. And this is an excellent opportunity for aid for trade, and e-commerce already is a major E for trade objective for many countries. The issue has to do with the tourism sector, and going back to what I mentioned about cooperation and coordination, it's really sad, but the share of aid for trade that goes to tourism is incredibly low. The World Tourism Organization has done some work on this, and it's shockingly low. And part of that is that sectors such as agriculture, infrastructure, seem to be much farther ahead in line when it comes to resources. So part of it really has to be about the sector speaking out and taking part in domestic policy debates and saying that, you know, we're an extremely important sector. We make a major economic contribution. It's time that we finally got some resources that are proportionate. Another answer is simply that you can approach this from almost any direction, because tourism is linked to almost everything. So you can use resources for gender, for example, and there's actually, ITC has something called She Trades, and the Commonwealth, Kim will probably maybe highlight this as well, has a program specifically for Commonwealth countries, and that does include in the tourism sector. But the sector has to speak up and to insist that they be included. Thank you.
Maybe I can just say something.
Okay. Yeah, please.
Yes, thank you. It's a very good question. I don't know if we grasped fully in my presentation. What I wanted to introduce is that from the G20, one of the key commitment is to create, with the launch of the ALULA framework, which is community-based tourism development. The idea is to actually create a fund for tourism as well in supporting community development. So we are really working on that with G20 economies, which are the biggest donors of development aid, which Gail was mentioning, which of course integrates aid for trade as well. So as I said, the crisis is maybe an opportunity for donors and the development community to see more the importance of really reaching out to the community. So we keep you posted as it goes, but we do have some quite interesting advances on that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we go to the next question. Before that, Mr. Asim Saha typed his message, but I already give him a floor, so I think it's we better listen for his question. And then, you know, I have Ahmed Ikhtifar that plan to reply live, so please prepare. And then I have some name that I write down before: Professor Narayan, David Sombe. It looks like you leave a message. But I couldn't record that before, so I will give you the floor after this too. Thank you. Mr. Asim Saha, please.
Thank you, Neela, for your giving me a time. I am come from the Bangladesh on the perspective of our country, lower middle income countries. You know that after pandemic situation, many people are unemployed on this situation. Only God knows what will happen in the next time after recovery from the COVID-19 situation. Many people easily employed from the non-government organization, NGO like us, others, government institution, others part of a country. But this, you know that the longest sea beach of our country, Cox's Bazar, so we cannot easily understand to move from the others international country like as first world countries or Western countries. Many visitors come to our country to watch the longest sea beach, the Cox's Bazar. But at the time, the precaution of the health hazard, another time, the tourist place is not visited of our country. So many tourist guy or another employed person has unemployed at that time. So we should consider also after the pandemic situation another alternative recovery situation on the third world country like as lower middle income, say Maldives, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan. So many of the visitor easily visit of our country to maintain social distancing and masks and another personal protective equipment. So is it suitable for the others country representation? So it will be the curriculum we have to expect from the others foreign visitor international delegates to come to our country. Thanks a lot.
Nella, you're muted. Nella.
Sorry. Yeah, related to your question, I want to add so the international collaboration on here. So about the travel corridor or travel bubble, that's as Matthias mentioned that there's more like a bilateral collaboration. And in this situation, low income countries or the third world, they don't have comparative advantage to negotiate of that. So I think now the problem in the fair trade, you know, that's inclusiveness. I think they can have answer that. This will be a problem. So in here, is there any like international action, international collaboration to bring this together? You know, if not, if it's not controlled, just based on the bilateral, this will be like a naming and shaming, and then low-income countries, middle developing countries will be in the disadvantage of this. So if there's a multilateral approach, they have like a specific criteria and they have like a special guidance. Usually they happen in the international level. So this will help, you know, and guide the low-income countries. So maybe later for this, Dale and Matthias can also add this. And then before I give this to the panelists, I think Ahmed Iktifar, Mr. Ahmed Iktifar want to answer that in the floor as well. So Mr. Ahmed, the floor is yours. So I think he's not here yet. So I can come back, give this to the floor to answer Mr. Ashim Saha question and maybe address the international cooperation for this. Who first? Matthias or Dale? Oh yeah, Dale, okay.
Okay, I will quickly respond to travel bubbles and then maybe Dale can add. I think what we see is the preference of tourists are changing now that they attach much more importance to health. And of course, if you're an LDC that has a health system that is that doesn't compare to a developed country, and you want to attract international tourists, that might be an issue. So it will be, I think, hard for these countries to convince the same number of people to travel to their countries, because now people are more sensitive to health issues. And we have seen a case like Cambodia, where they ask for a huge deposit for people when they enter the country, in case that they need to be treated in a hospital. And of course, this also deters international visitors. So it's not an easy way forward. So it's not only the negotiation that might be difficult, but it's also the behavior of tourists and their willingness to take risks. Over to you, Dale.
Thank you. I sort of specialize on LDC tourism, and it turns out I actually did a working paper which was 85 pages together with Bangladesh Foreign Trade Institute co-author. And I think the immediate response, or the most promising option, is to focus on domestic tourism, because Bangladesh has a rising middle class, which is huge. And they really want to get out, especially for short vacations from time to time. And so developing your own domestic tourism market is a good first step to developing the international market, which is often more complicated and expensive and demanding, as Matthias has already mentioned. And I think it's important to mention that Bangladesh has, I think, 3 World Heritage Sites, including the Sundarbans, which is the largest, tiger reserve. It's the largest mangrove forest in the world. It's shared, of course, with India, and the tigers go back and forth. But my understanding was that there's actually more tigers in Bangladesh than there are in India, but don't quote me on that one. But the point is that that's just one of the many natural heritage sites that Bangladesh can develop both at the domestic and the international level. I'll be happy to follow up on that. And the paper that I mentioned is available as a working paper on the WTO website. If you have trouble, just send me an email and I'll drop you a copy.
Thank you, Dale. Susan and Kim and Zoritza, you want to respond? Okay, Kim.
Thank you, Nella. I don't have anything to add to Dale and Matthias's response. Just to go back to the first lady's question, I think it was Chloe, about the informal trade in the retail sector, and to sort of endorse what Dale said about the importance of speaking up. I just wanted to mention that in Vanuatu, women comprise over half of the informal sector, because they work primarily in food, services, and traditional handicraft. And of course, the pandemic has inhibited sourcing for those local producers as well as village businesses. So what they managed to successfully do was organize an association of women handicraft vendors who successfully lobbied to gain representation in government consultations on tourism sector recovery. And I think that's a very good example of how the informal sector can lobby and make their voices heard in the formal policy setting environment. And I think that is what we're talking about as part of the tourism reset towards sustainable tourism. Governments are now rethinking how they design the tourism sector, how they incentivize and rebuild the tourism sector. And I think this is a good opportunity for associations like that to lobby and get their voices heard. That's just a point I wanted to make. Thanks.
Okay, I think thank you, Kim. So I think we have our last question. That I will give the floor to Professor Narayan. Professor Narayan, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Nella, for giving me the opportunity to make a comment. I don't have any direct questions, but I have some comments. But before I do that, I want to thank Dean Sonobe for inviting me to this very important forum. And I have actually learned a lot by listening to all the experts. So thank you for broadening my own knowledge on this. In terms of background, I'm a Pacific Islander, I'm a Fijian, so I'm from Fiji. So I understand a lot about tourism, as you can imagine. I've done a lot of work on tourism as well. I'm also the president of the Asia Pacific Applied Economics Association, and we're doing a lot of work in the Pacific Island countries with ADBI. We have had actually 2 conferences and workshops with ADBI on tourism in Fiji. The latest one was in February, where we talked about, and it's very much related to what has been discussed here, It was about climate change, blue economy, ocean resources, and sustainability. And at that time in February, the issue was really climate change. And of course, the conversation has changed now to this pandemic. What I gathered, and I think that this has been a, like, as I said, wonderful experience for me to learn and also look forward to the next steps. I think what interested me most was the strategies that were discussed, and I listened to all of you with great interest. And I don't have any disagreements. I think that that's the way to go. What I do believe, though, and somebody mentioned, my apologies, I forgot who mentioned, but somebody mentioned that quite rightfully that the pandemic obviously is having different effects in different countries, and therefore it needs different sort of responses. That's kind of given. We cannot have homogeneous policies. But a bigger part of this story about COVID-19 is the fact that it is not a conventional shock. It's not like your global financial crisis that it comes and goes. It has been there, in a very persistent way for a good part of 8 months. What this has done from a tourism industry point of view, yes, everything is, closed down at the moment. If you look at Fiji, the western part of the country, Nandi, Lautoka, these parts are completely dead. People are heavily unemployed in these parts. People have returned to their villages to do farming, to do fishing. So what it means is that the policy has to be very, very dynamic, because the impact has been very, very different to what we are used to as policymakers, as industry stakeholders. What it means that even if the pandemic goes away and we return to some sort of normalcy, the type of policies we are talking about, not all of them are going to work, particularly in small island states. And the reason it's not going to work is because the tourism industry, like ourselves, we have adjusted to this. Instead of having face-to-face workshops, conferences, we have moved to Zoom, online forum. Similarly, the tourism industry or some part of the tourism industry is going to make an adjustment to the way tourism activities across the board. And you know better than myself, a whole lot of activities in tourism are going to change. What that means is that regardless of when we return to normalcy, the issue of employment, because the biggest strength of the tourism industry, at least in the Pacific Island countries, has been employment. And it has become very, very visible now with the unemployment rate and, of course, the social instability that it brings. So the issue then is the policies that help recoup those lost jobs as well. So it's not only about getting the tourism industry on its feet, because what we understand now, or have started to understand, is that we would never be able to return to what we were pre-pandemic, because businesses have adjusted or are making adjustments in technology, and there is a technological aspect to the tourism industry. It was always there, but more so now, because businesses have invested heavily, including airlines, have invested heavily in the infrastructure. So the way airlines, the way we will travel is also going to change. And travel has been a big part of the tourism industry. So what I'm saying is that the strategies that we are talking about are not going to work for everyone, and it's not going to work for, not all of them are not going to work for smaller states like Fiji. What is needed is a roadmap, I think, for small states, because their responses, the way the policies are going to be implemented in the small states, has to be different if we are going to minimize the economic and social impact and environmental impacts of the pandemic via the tourism industry. So I think that
Narayan, could you
yeah.
wrap up? Thank you.
Yes, sorry, yes. Okay, so I think that, we need a roadmap which is more of a constitution guiding the recovery, rather than the policy prescriptions that we are used to in giving in crises. So I think as a next step, that should be the case. My final point to close off, a lot of the predictions that and some of you did wonderful presentations with the projections for the future. I think that the game changer there is the vaccine, because of the uncertainty. The moment the vaccine comes in, the dynamics of the industry is going to change. And a lot of the forecasts that we have now, and someone presented that it will take another 5 years for the tourism industry to return to what it was pre-pandemic. That may be true, but I think the moment the vaccine comes in, because we don't understand what sort of effects the vaccine is going to have on the industry. So that's where I will stop and let others speak. Sorry for going over time.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Professor Narayan, it's a very insightful input. I'm not gonna ask our panelists to answer the long answer, but if you want to address what Professor Narayan said, that can you do that in 1 or 2 sentences, if you have any, or if not, then I will conclude the session. So is there any, Kim, Dale, Matthias, Zarisa, do you have any, Dale? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think I completely agree with what you said, and that the acceleration of e-commerce, for example, together with many of the other technological changes, is going to change the nature of employment. And I think we also need to look at the opportunities, because when you analyze the upstream and downstream value chains, there are many unused opportunities, and often these opportunities have higher wages. When you think about the using technology, e-commerce to sell products and things. So it really requires a rethink about the opportunities and what the potential is. But like many new technologies, often new opportunities are presented, and often these are better paying jobs than the ones that are lost. That's a very short answer.
Thank you. I think with that, I'm sorry we run out of time. I already added 10 minutes, but we still passed that. So with this, we should conclude this session. And thank you for the speaker for investing your time with us today, and to all participants and all fruitful discussion we have. So with that, please join me to give my appreciation to all speakers. Thank you very much. So I come back to the agenda. I have my colleague here, Karsten Tenvat from World Trade Organization. He will deliver our wrap up for this 3 days webinar. Karsten, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nella, and thank you to the speakers right now. I won't obviously try to summarize 3 days of very rich discussions, but let me just highlight a few things that we have heard and that have been emphasized by the speakers. So we talked about 4 broad themes: trade and the role and its role in the global economy, trade and health, trade and environmental sustainability, and today the issue of tourism and its recovery efforts. So on the impact of the pandemic of trade, of course, we have heard a lot about this, and we heard on the first day about trade being the lifeblood of the global economy, having been under strain already prior to the pandemic, but coming under even greater strain as a result of that pandemic. So, of course, creating a lot of pressure on economies, but the pandemic also accelerating the transformation of trade that was already underway prior to the outbreak, and especially in amplifying the role of digitalization, of services trade, and potentially also the risk diversification in global supply chains. Something of a good news that we heard during the first day is that there has been no major outbreak of protectionism. Global value chains seem to be holding up to the pressures they're under, and transport costs have normalized. Of course, that doesn't mean by any means that the situation is back to normal, but it was emphasized many times that openness, trade openness and openness to the global economy continues to be the best bet to join value chains and benefit from trade and build back better. And we had examples about Vietnam, Cambodia, how they are doing this. Regarding trade in medical goods, which was the topic on the first day, of course, COVID resulted in lots of disruptions to the global value chains in essential goods, which are highly concentrated in Asia. We heard that many regulatory measures have been introduced, but not only restrictive ones. We heard that 50% of regulatory measures in response to COVID are trade facilitative, and that is quite encouraging. And this has spurred some experimentation on new forms of trying to facilitate trade for essential goods, using virtual tools, using electronic certificates, and this is quite encouraging. We also heard, and in relation to the last comment about vaccines, how important trade facilitation will be, because it's not only about developing a vaccine, but getting the vaccine to where it is needed. And for that, you will need a big emphasis on soft logistics and trade facilitation, and of course, regulatory cooperation. We heard that self-sufficiency is not a sustainable strategy in the long run, and that sustainable solution is, again, keeping the borders open. On trade and environmental sustainability in the second day, we emphasize the importance of trade policymakers working hand in hand with the environmental community and environmental policy officials. We delved into two examples of where trade can be particularly helpful to promote sustainability, and that is in the area of circular economy and in the area of trying to rein in fishery subsidies, harmful fishery subsidies. And today, of course, you just all participated in the discussion on tourism, which was very, very rich. And there, I would just point out a few points. Of course, the fact that tourism has been very hard hit by the pandemic. We heard the value of loss of 730 billion, lots of jobs at risks, 70% fall in tourist arrival. But again, a glimmer of hope in that travelers show certain willingness to overcome hurdles when they travel. So this brings about how do we go about recovery, right? And in this important sector. And above all, the crisis has presented an opportunity. I think this was quite clear from all speakers, that we need to invest in a different kind of tourism, and we need to use the time this time to think about what that kind of different kind of tourism is can be. In the short run, of course, a lot might be about travel bubbles and facilitating trade bilaterally, domestic trade. In the longer term, it is important to think about sustainability, think about inclusiveness, and we heard very interesting examples, for example, about New Zealand, where you are trying to see tourism rethought as part of a living system influenced by the indigenous worldview. We also had other interesting examples of trying to leverage sustainability initiatives like marine sanctuaries to become magnets for tourism and to try to find synergies between green, blue economy and tourism, of course. We heard about the Dale's 4 Cs in trying to guide us in how we look at tourism in the future, how we try to think about reinventing the tourism sector, and I think that's quite useful. We also heard about initiatives, cooperation initiatives, UN WTO building solutions initiatives, and several others. The importance here, I think, is to emphasize the whole of sector coordinated approach that is needed, and that we have started seeing in places, for example, like Jamaica. Finally, just on the questions, we heard digitalization offering lots of opportunities for the tourism sector as well. We heard examples from Tanzania, Maldives again, and some other countries. The tourism sector being cross-cutting, I think it's important to emphasize that it needs to leverage sources of development finance and cooperation targeting many other sectors, not just the tourism itself, but gender, SMEs. This is a point that my colleague Dale made, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. So the question coming out of the crisis better was really at the core of the discussions today, and I very much appreciate the speakers bringing their insights into this important question. So that obviously leaves me just to participate, to thank very much our participants, thank very much my co-organizers, co-hosts. I very much enjoyed working with you to this, and I look forward to future collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karsten, and very a comprehensive wrap up. And now we arrive, in our final session, that's closing remarks from our Dean of ADBI, Professor Tatsushi Sonobe. Dean Sonobe, are you there? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nela. Yeah, I'm here, here at office today. First, please allow me to deliver my message to my WTO colleague, Mr. Ek Ho Lim. He was supposed to be with us on Monday and today, but he is under medical leave and quarantine. I'm very sorry to hear this, and we will keep you in our thoughts and prayers. I hope that medications the doctor are giving you are helping you feel better, and you will return home and back to work soon. In this policy dialogue, we have discussed how to unleash the power of international trade and investment to save our lives and liveliness. You know, Karsten has just provided a very nice, comprehensive summary of the very extremely rich discussions over the 3 days. So I will make my comments very short. So the dialogue started with ADB Vice President Bambam Santono's keynote address, in which he explored how globalization is returning. And he concluded with a powerful message that ADB commits itself to supporting developing Asia and the Pacific to prepare for returning globalization. After the keynote speech, there was a very nice presentations by the Shin-Yong and other people, especially the Matthias and Ben and Devin and Kwon. Yeah, and also the discussions were very interesting. And I regret that I missed day 2 entirely, when the the issues of the trade and sustainability were discussed. And then today, the day 3, extremely interesting. It started with a keynote address offered by the Karsten on behalf of Mr. Lim. And he argued that policies dealing with trade and climate change should go hand in hand because of the close interdependent nature. And they should take into account the importance of increasing inclusiveness, which include inclusive development through tourism and as an important ingredient. And then Matthias' presentation was about his scenario analysis, which provided very clear pictures of possible developments and a clear sense of the degree of uncertainties involved. He talked about the kind of substitution of the international tourism by domestic tourism, and bilateral travel bubbles. And then Mr. Dave Honeck of WTO made a short but really powerful presentation emphasizing tourism's 4 C's as the best guidance to reviving, rebuilding tourism with sustainability and resilience. So do you remember what 4 C's? Complexity, coordination, creativity, and cooperation. And then what was nice about this was, not this, he enlightened us with this concept of 4C, but also he mentioned the importance of training, retraining, and which was echoed with the question asked by Professor Cho in the chat box and on the floor. The question was, who can address the problem of lack of marketing skills and probably other managerial skills as well. And also he mentioned the important thing, the tourism's 4 C's should be supplemented by good statistics or a good measure, which could be a kind of key indicators of performance. So we need the indicator of development of tourism from social and environmental aspects. And then my kind of response was to say to myself that, not only the social and environmental aspects, so not just enrich the kind of measure, but also the agility making measure is important. Agility or speed in information gathering and the dissemination. But then the presentation was made by the UNWTO's Ms. Zorissa Urosevic. She introduced us to the this new thing, UNWTO's tourism data dashboard. This is a really a nice key performance indicator for inbound and outbound tourism at the global, regional, and the national levels. Yeah, when I heard this term, tourism data dashboard, my immediate response was to say to myself, "Oh, isn't this great?" Then she also mentioned consumer values and habits, environmental imperatives, inclusive community development through tourism, and the link among tourism recovery, EU Green Deal, and the 2030 agenda. So UNWTO has already taken social and environmental perspectives into consideration. But the important thing is not just to take into consideration, but to develop a concrete indicator and data that measure the environmentally sustainable and socially inclusive development through tourism. So I really look forward to that kind of the fruit or output of UNWTO's valuable efforts. And then Ms. Kim Campbell of Commonwealth introduced us to the Commonwealth COVID-19 recovery measures towards sustainable tourism, digital tourism, and blue economy strategy towards the realization of sustainable tourism. Yeah, her argument sounded to me like a very good example of the third C, that is creativity. And then the Professor Susan Becken at Griffith University introduced the experience of New Zealand, which has had a transformation of tourism from unmanaged growth in international tourism associated with high levels of carbon emission into tourism understood to be part of living system, together with the transformation of the economy into domestic economy. So the discussion after presentation was also extremely interesting. And then Professor Narayan's point about the expansion of e-commerce was also interesting. And then Mr. Honek, Dale made a nice comment that this expansion of e-commerce would have a profound implication for employment in future. I completely agree with these arguments, and I think this is very important. So the discussion after discussion over these 3 days, although I don't know what happened on the second day, but very, very enlightening to me and very satisfactory. So I hope all the discussion was satisfactory for all participants. So I'd like to thank all the speakers for their valuable contributions and all participants for their interesting questions and active participation. And also, I would like to thank the organizing team, Carsten Steinfurt from WTO, Matthias Helbr from ADB, and ADBI staff, Swati and Sato-san, and all speakers again, and the country participants from Indonesia, Thailand, and Fiji, and then ADBI staff, Derek, Tsuchiya-san, and Hiromi-san. Oh, thank you very much once again. And I should stop here. So over to Nela.
Thank you very much, Dean Sonobe, and thank you for your kind words and compliments. I mean, like, keep our fighting up, our spirit up. So with that, we finish our 3 days webinar, and I personally apologize that disruption today, and thank you for our collaboration, and thank you for all our partners. See you again in our other collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Sonobe. Thank you, team. Thank you, Karsten, Matthias.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Nella, good job. Well done.
Thank you, Didi Kim. The disconnection make me like, oh, what happened?
I was surprised too. So what happened?
Yeah, actually, Ling Fang used this Zoom to University of Tokyo lesson, but actually we already buy this special link, special Zoom for him. Maybe he just confused which one, so he used this.
Just accidentally pushed the long button.
Yeah, so he gave this link to his to the student, and he started the meeting, and then I don't know, and then I saw that he sent email. Oh yeah, that,
I see.
Yeah, that link is used for other event. Actually, we already have special link for University of Tokyo, so I need to talk to him for the
he must be
special talk to be more careful next time.
Thank you very much, Nella, and everyone for organizing and inviting my participation. I wanted to ask, will you perhaps share the photo? Would you be able to share the group photo?
Yes, we can share with you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience too.
Yes,
thank you. Yeah, please make sure that to send out all the photos to the participants, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we share the slides as well. That's linked to the web posting, and we also do the broadcast for the recording later on, right?
Yes.
I think the sending the photo is very important, so that please don't forget to send all the photos to the participants, so that they can use them in their purpose. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I will.
Thank you again. Have a good weekend, everyone.
You too. Yeah.
You too.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Stay well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Didi Kim.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk to you, but today I'm busy, very busy tonight. So maybe the early next week.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I'll ask Mehara-san to make an appointment with you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So yeah, I'm available anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will have to speak tonight, almost midnight at